Hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us for our Civic Engagement Lunch Talk. I'm Norma Ramos. I'm the Associate Director here at the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement. Just a couple quick things about the Institute for Policy and Civic Engagement I want to just share in terms of our Civic Engagement Research Awards and our Lunch Talk and the connection to the Lunch Talk and the awardees. The Institute supports research from UIC faculty that centers on the concept, practices, and methods of civic engagement. So we're super excited to host and showcase and highlight the work that was done from our awardees last year in today's lunch talk. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. So reminding everyone to mute your mic during the presentation. I think we have it muted as well. You're welcome to unmute your mics during the Q&A dialogue sessions at the end. And feel free to use the chat function throughout the presentation. We'll take a look at that. We'll also reference it at the end of the session as well. And we are recording today's lunch talk so that we can share the presentation outward as well and share with others who aren't able to make it. So again, just want to thank you all for joining us for the COVID Conversations, a public history project of Chicago's History Corps for our Civic Engagement Lunch Talk. It will be presented by our guest speaker and awardee, Dr. Jennifer Brier, Professor of Department of History and Gender and Women's Studies here at UIC. Also, Alan Mayer, a graduate student, Department of History at UIC. Oscar Solis, who is not able to make it today, but he is MFA, Department of Graphic Design at UIC. I think I got that right. And Cesar Thompson, undergraduate student, School of Public Health at UIC. We're excited to hear more about this from this interdisciplinary team of UIC faculty and students as they share their experiences building a Chicago History Corps, which documented how communities struggled in and got through 2020. So I'm super excited to turn it over to Dr. Brier and her team to present the Civic Engagement Lunch Talk.
Thank you, Norma, for that lovely introduction. I see Elle is here, and so is Cesar, and Oscar sends his regrets. So I'm going to share my screen and hope for the best. I'm going to play it from the current slide. A year ago now, I don't even know what time it was. But I think it was a year ago in January, Elle and I started working on this project called COVID Conversations. We didn't know it was going to be called COVID Conversations yet. We just knew that we were going to try and work together to build what we were calling a history corps in Chicago. And we would partner with we would sort of engage with two ongoing relationships that we have at UIC. The first is with Illinois Humanities, which runs the Odyssey Project, which provides 9 free credit hours of humanities college level work to adults who have not received their college degrees and who qualify who have income qualified to be part of this. And I think Becky Amato is on the call. So our partners from Illinois Humanities are here. And Odyssey came to UIC several years ago to see if we could offer those free credits. And we were able to arrange for that to happen. So UIC is the credit granting institution for that. And we saw this as an extension of that work. So the people who joined this project from Illinois Humanities had all completed that sequence of learning. And the other people who were brought into this were people from the School of Public Health, largely, and the School of Public Health has been a major partner in creating a COVID response corps, and they have developed a citizen scientist class. And Cesar was one of their most amazing students and partners in this work, and I was really so thankful that Cesar joined the project. And then I'll let Cesar talk about it, but the second best part of it is that Cesar is now enrolled as an undergraduate student here at UIC as one of our first class in the Life Scholars program. Maybe he'll talk some more about that. So it really was a kind of attempt to deepen our relationships that had been sort of coming up in different places to think about fundamentally how history as a practice, as a method, and as a way of learning from one another and thinking about context could actually make us better at what we do, make us healthier, make us more able to hear and resolve conflict, make us more able to actually document the experiences of people living through COVID. And 2020 in particular, that was the main focus. So there were obviously lots of other things going on in 2020. And so this project really kind of took flight in that space. And we were excited to get funding from IPSI to pilot setting this up. And I'm gonna turn it over to Elle to talk about what we did that last winter and how we sort of brought people together. And just so that to give context, and Elle can make more of an introduction for themselves, it's just also that Elle is a graduate student in history working on an MAT in the teaching of history and deeply engaged in a range of different kinds of public history projects. So I'll turn it over to Elle for the next part.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elle Mayer. A slight correction, I'm actually just getting a regular master's. I'm not in the MAT program.
All right.
But it doesn't really matter. Yeah, and I worked with Jenny throughout this project, and especially, was excited to work with her on developing kind of the curriculum, more or less, for the workshops that we did to bring this incredible group of community historians together and sort of facilitate their history work. And so one of the main kind of sort of guiding principles behind these workshops was that everybody who was in this cohort already had the tools and the sort of expertise in their communities to be historians. So a lot of what we were doing was just sort of drawing out those skills and those ideas about what it means to collect and document a history of our communities, in particular, in this case, about the experience of COVID-19 in 2020. So we did 2 workshops initially to sort of set up this project. And the first one, in addition to just sort of introducing who are we and what is sort of the big picture scope of this project, we wanted to make clear what our values are as public historians, as community historians. So sharing a little bit about Jenny's past work and the sort of methods by which we both make history that is sort of in collaboration with the communities that we are writing about and with and for, and what that looks like in practice. So sort of setting up those principles and then setting up some of the basics of what do we mean when we say we're doing history, and a kind of useful framework for that is the 5 C's, which is a common sort of framework that especially teachers at the undergraduate level often use for talking about what kind of questions are we asking when we're doing history. It's not super important. It's things like looking at context, looking at the complexity of something, looking at causality, what caused something to happen. So we explained sort of those basic ideas. But then from there, we really built these workshops around what are your stakes in terms of engaging in this kind of history for yourself. What do you think are the stakes for people who might read or engage with this history? What are the stakes for the narrators you might choose to speak with? And so we really just engaged this group in small group and then large group conversations about their personal stakes, what their curiosity is that brings them to this work, and then also starting to brainstorm who are the narrators, which is the word that we use to refer to the people who we interviewed for these oral histories that we collected. Who are the narrators that you might want to interview for this project. And so it really was sort of setting up the group to do exactly the work that we do every day as historians, which is identify your sources and think about what questions you might ask of your sources. And then in the second workshop, we delved a little bit more into the skills of oral history. So modeling oral history interviews, and then pairing the groups off to practice those interviews with each other, and then think through from that experience, what kinds of questions will they be asking of their narrators, and as a group sort of identifying the key themes that we were going to pursue in oral history interviews, and the sort of core questions that every participant might ask in some form of their narrators, and then of course encouraged everybody to sort of build there depending on who it was that they were talking to, what issues they were most curious about. So we had both a kind of core and consistency going through the project that allowed for sort of conversations then between all of our narrators, but also allowing for each of our historians to sort of trust their own expertise and their own curiosity and respond to sort of the stories and interests of the people they're interviewing. So those two workshops kind of set up our participants for this project, and then we kind of sent them out to sort of equipped with the tools they needed in terms of consent forms and sort of tips for how to record and how to sort of introduce this project, all of that, and then collect 1 to 3 interviews from their neighbors or their siblings, parents, children, etc., that they would then sort of bring back to the group for the next step in this project. Is there anything you wanted to add there, Jenny?
No, that was perfect. Caesar, do you want to talk a little bit about how you experienced it? That was a really perfect gloss of what we did. Thanks, Elle.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, it was very interesting to go from being a contact tracer and learning about motivational interviewing and learning about cultural humility. And then through citizen science, we learned more about oral history, which is a different chamber in the, if there's like a gigantic, space in which we're talking about different ways to talk to people and to elicit reactions and to involve them in like a narrative. It was really great to learn different ways to how, like, what's the difference between an interview when you're trying to find out if when someone got sick, or versus when you're just trying to encourage someone to kind of speak from the heart and give them the space to express themselves. And we learned that we picked it up pretty quickly, like you were saying, because we kind of already been primed, I feel like, by our COVID-19 work. But the expertise from Elle and from Dr. Brier was so useful in encouraging us to think of our stories and to think of our communities as these sources of history, and to and that these experiences we were going through were valuable, and the worth of it, I think, is tough to appreciate when it's so recent and so tough, and it's still ongoing in the case of COVID. But I think the project was really good at just encouraging people to kind of reflect, to take a moment and to see the worth in, like, kind of documenting like what we were experiencing. And it opened up for me personally opportunity to kind of like deepen a friendship with someone that I mostly knew from the internet, and was not like someone who's become like a close personal friend of mine now. And it was also an opportunity for me to engage closer with my coworkers. And yeah, I just, it was really kind of a magical time. And bringing back so many memories, just looking at those photos you shared, Dr. Brier, thinking about those days, especially because we weren't meeting in person very often
Right,
back then. So unless we were like at a vaccine event or something like that. So
right.
it's good to look back. It's good to look back. And yeah, I just wanted to say that was such an experience. And we've kind of finally got around to the finished product now, and the work that has been done post-interview is so staggeringly impressive, and I just can't wait for you all to see it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Caesar. It's really, I do feel like part of what I learn when I talk about oral history, practice oral history, when people do oral histories, like it does have that effect. It really, because so much about what I try to do in oral history is learn how to listen and hear, and that we don't have a lot of those spaces, and this is one where you can do that. And for me, as someone who talks a lot, it's good to have that place. And I think for people who don't tend to talk a lot, it's pretty amazing to have an opportunity to be able to talk. And so when you can enter into that relationship from that place, it's really wonderful. So to sort of underscore, all of the historical training work happened online. We finally met each other on campus in April, and that's the next slide I will show you. We met each other at the School of Design in that big weird building on the East Campus. And Oscar Solis, who is on the left-hand side of your screen, was a key partner in the project all along, and was really the other principle of the project that this fits into, which is called History Moves, that IPSI has been was our first funder 10 years ago or 12 years ago, our first funder. And then to be able to come back with this project is really exciting for me. The idea is that we should, like, what it takes to put the public into public history. And then the best way to do that, as far as I'm concerned, and I think what you'll see in a minute will suggest to you why I think it's right, is that if you add history and design together, you're able to produce things that have a really powerful effect. And so Oscar was the lead designer here. Elle has a set of skills that merge those two things together. I'm the sort of historian who understands enough about design to get myself in trouble. And then all of the people who were members of the History Corps were willing to take on that creative space and do that creative work. Some of them were like, I felt like I was in grade school. Like, you can see them all working, doing different things. Oscar gave a lecture on the history of poster design, and then everybody got an X-Acto knife. We got all of these tools, and people just set up their shop, and they took the interviews that they had done and they started to put them into visual form with Oscar's help. So you can see here, there are folks working all together. Of course, we're all deeply masked because it's April 2022. These are the picture on the left-hand side is of two people, one of whom was the interviewer and one of whom was the woman she interviewed, so the narrator. So they came together as a team and made things together. Everybody else came singularly as the COVID Corps as the History Corps member, but that was a team that came, and they produced one of the most iconic images of the whole project. So Oscar did this work with us. We went through different kinds of processes. Here you can see on the left, Caesar cutting out things, and he has on a butterfly on his shirt, which I just realized when I looked at these pictures again to get this ready, you'll see that image again, but it was quite incredible. And then the picture on the right is one of the Odyssey Project alums working on something. And Anna was really the first person to make a decision to ask a question. And we had always talked about oral history is asking questions and listening to the answers. And through this design project, we came to realize that we were doing something called COVID conversations, and everything had a question. And Anna's first question, what kind of tears did you cry, was really in some ways among the most arresting questions. And we had obviously talked a lot about questions. I don't think that that was a question she necessarily asked in her interview, but it was one that she reflected on after the interview was done. Here's another person working on one of the posters, and I'll show you how they all ended up. On the left, excuse me, is someone working on a poster who had interviewed people who had their water cut off during COVID. And so she was working with different ideas about money and water and what kept people from survival. And on the right, there's a mask underneath, as you can see. She cut out a mask. There's that blue mask underneath, and then these puzzle pieces, which became a real theme of all of the interviews, and of course, then the skyline, right? So here's where we produced, here's where we produced the posters. So I'll just say something quickly, and if Oscar were here, he could say more about it. I'm gonna share my screen of the, here it is. There are those butterflies again, by the way. So we created posters, and Oscar, who is a brilliant graphic designer and artist, took these collages that the core people worked on, and we have all of them saved, and you can see photographs of them, and distilled them into these posters that are 20 by 24. And I have a set for IPSY that I will drop off. They're incredibly beautiful. And I'll just go through them quickly, and then I'll turn to the second thing that was made that Elle led, which is a zine, so that anybody on this call or anywhere else could do all of this themselves together if they wanted to. So this one was the first one. What kind of tears did you cry? How did your community come together? What was your COVID journey? And now that I just saw that you were wearing that sweatshirt, Caesar, it like brought all of the experience of that day back in a really beautiful way. What did the pandemic change in your life? This was actually based on one that Elle made that you could see. Here's the what did you need to survive with the money and the water. Who did you care for and how? There's the mask. How did you make a way out of no way? With the flower growing out of the concrete. And then the one that of course is on the poster. What was your COVID skyline? And obviously this is an East Side bridge. It's not the typical skyline that many people associate with Chicago, but if you're from the East Side of Chicago, you know exactly, this takes you there immediately. And the piece that Kathy made originally had a combination of Zoom as a skyline and the Ewing Avenue Bridge as a skyline. And so both of them were there. So I'm going to turn it back over to Elle. I'm going to pull up the, Elle, I have the zine in the PowerPoint. There you go. All right, Elle, it's all you.
So once our participants had completed their interviews, we were always planning to do that poster project with Oscar. But then it was sort of an open question, how else might we take these histories that we've collected and share them with the public? And so we did a follow-up workshop in addition to the design workshop with Oscar, where we brought the group back together again after they had had a chance to sort of read over their interview transcripts, because we did transcribe all of the interviews, exchange their transcripts with a couple other people in the group, and everybody had a chance to sort of note down, okay, what are the themes that we're seeing across the board? What are the stories that feel really important to highlight? And then get together and talk about how do we take these themes and these stories and share them with the audience that we're most interested in. And we threw out a couple different sort of possible outputs basically that we could create. And there was one group that really sort of rallied around the idea of making a zine, especially something that could be used as a classroom resource. And so I worked actually with Caesar, who's an incredible collaborator, and a handful of other people who did some follow-up workshops in a much smaller group over Zoom with me, where we really sort of narrowed down how would we organize these stories into a zine. And we also really agreed that we wanted to have some kind of a lesson plan at the back to sort of guide, yeah, there it is, guide people in sort of how to maybe think about reading this zine as a historical document, but also in particular how to make a project similar to what we did. So basically reconstituting the workshops that we had done with the history core at the beginning, and turning that into a series of lesson plans that you could take into a classroom and make an oral history, that you could do in a community group, that you could do with your family, sort of based on also conversations that we as the zine team had about what were the aspects of the workshops that were the most helpful, what are some things that we learned that we want to make sure to pass on to other people just through doing this process. So that's sort of how this project came together. As you'll see, the zine does feature the same artwork that Oscar made for the posters. And it's also organized by question, similar to the posters, although not all of the questions on the posters are questions that we necessarily asked in those exact words to the narrators. And we tried in the zine to organize each kind of page of quotes from our different narrators into themes based on roughly questions that we did actually ask. So things like, what was your life like before the pandemic? What did you lose, at the start of 2020 when we had to quarantine and weren't able to show up in person anymore? And, what did you lose just in terms of this disease ravaging our communities, but also what did you gain? These are all questions that our interviewers brought to their narrators. And so we organized each page by those questions. And
I'll upload the documents when I'm out of this screen share. I can't do it right now cognitively. Sure. I don't know how to do it.
I can also show, if you'd like, Jenny, I have the issue open so I can sort of flip
great. Yeah.
Yeah, so
for it.
I could share my screen. Okay, so there's a version of the zine up on issue. So if you don't have a printed version, you can sort of still see the overall booklet here. So it's just 14 pages or 12 pages of these sort of different quotes from our participants, but this kind of gives you a sense of what I was saying in terms of how we organized it. Again, really in collaboration, the zine team, Caesar and a few more of us, just thinking through how do we make sure we sort of draw out the key lessons, the key themes and stories that came through in these interviews. And this is our sort of big sort of central spread, which is why we ended up calling the zine Care in Conversation, is that really every conversation did come back to how are you caring for yourself? How are you caring for others? In what ways did systems fail to care for you? How did your community care for, its most vulnerable members? So that's really what you see contained in this zine. And then, like I said, the lesson plan is here at the very back.
Can you post the issue link in the chat for people, Elle?
Yes, I sure can.
Caesar, do you want to say anything about that part of the process? And then I was gonna sort of open it up to hear, obviously, questions, but to say that we also really need your help in figuring out how to disseminate this. So Caesar, go for it.
Sure. Yeah, I just was thinking about the funny issues of transcription and trying to figure out, what did they actually say, man, because sometimes the AI doesn't quite nail it down. But yeah, the determining what questions or like what themes we were going for were really important. And also, I think it was important that we kind of uh, let the interview flow like according to who was being interviewed in a lot of ways. You know, we weren't really trying to like force people into answering a set number of questions or set questions. We just kind of would like let it go where it wanted to go. I started both of my interviews with asking about the Chicago origin stories of the person I was talking to, because you know, just this is a deeply important question to me. I feel like as someone who is a lifelong Chicagoan who's just in love with the city, you know, and I think pretty much everybody who lives here and cares about Chicago knows, like, you know, remembers very strongly like why they came and like what that was like. And I thought that was a good way to kind of ground the interviews and get us started. And you know, before we got too deep into COVID, which you know was still heavily on our minds as it is to some degree now. But yeah, that part and the end part, though the two parts who stayed the same for my interviews was the beginning question and the end, which was like what with the next generation, like if the document survives, you know, into the future, like what would you want, you know, the young people who hopefully will not have to think about COVID every day. Like what would you want them to know about what was going on right now? Like what was your life like and what did you have to struggle with and what did you gain? What did you make of this time? And yeah, those are two things that I really enjoyed being in conversation with Elle and all of us about, because you know we were finding these things together, and I think that was really important to the process.
Yeah. It was a really incredible, you know, I've done a version of this process a bunch of times over the last 10 years with different communities. And it is an incredibly powerful space to be able to engage with sort of expanding how everybody already is the best historian of their own lives. And I think sometimes historians forget that that people are actually historians. And you don't have to be academically trained to be a historian. Because as soon as you start asking questions of people, and then Caesar and I went and did the citizen scientist class this year, a couple weeks ago, and it was, you know, there were 100 people on the call from all over the south and west sides of Chicago, and people just, I mean, it like poured out. We had people talking about the MLK rebellion. We had people talking about the moving of the racial segregation line across neighborhoods over the course of their lifetime. I mean, it was just phenomenal, and making people feel like they have that, they can unleash that, and someone's going to listen to it and care about it enough to record it, transcribe it, and make something out of it is an incredible thing. And I think that obviously the Odyssey alums were really important in that. The citizen scientist folks brought a real public health research, capital P, capital H, capital R. And the Odyssey students, I would say, also brought deep historical and archival and literary research, which is often called scholarship and not research. They brought that to the table. And in those interactions, we were really able to bring together a lot of different things. And then we all were able to bound things in a way, to give boundaries to it, that allowed people to really produce the kinds of things that are, I think, incredible pieces of artistic work. So that's what I hope. And Elle or Caesar, do you want to say anything else? Okay, great. Maybe we could just hear what people have to say.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I mean, thank you to you and your team. I mean, this has just been wonderful. Thank you, Jenny, Elle, Caesar, and Oscar, who wasn't able to join us as well. I mean, I was really just like taking notes and thinking about what you said as well, Jenny, is like last reflection, like we are the best historians of our lives. And so I just love that piece when we think about like teacher, learner, scholar, right? And we all are like all of that, that's who we are, right? All into one. So I really just love that. So I'm going to stop recording and then turn it into a Q&A. So open it up here.